welcome back to Active Ingredients, the leadership series for people who build, scale, and shape the future of life sciences. I'm your host, Tom Dove, founder and CEO of Fraser Dove International, the life science talent consultancy. Today's guest is Alex Joyeux, a global biotech operator who's built and led high-performance teams across the full life cycle of medicines. From early development and market access through to global launches, franchise leadership, and now COO roles in biotech. Alex has spent his career translating science into access, strategy into execution, and ambition into outcomes. His journey spans big pharma, launches in China, enterprise leadership, and a deliberate reinvention into biotech building mode. This episode is about what it really takes to move from expert to enterprise leader, build trust across cultures, and create performance through deeper self-awareness and intentional leadership. Alex, welcome to Active Ingredients.
Thank you so much for having me. Big goals. I like it.
Yeah, fantastic. And you and I have had a few conversations where, as we'd said before we even recorded this, they've always been really insightful. And I'm excited for you to actually share some of the stories and some of your experiences with the listeners, because we haven't had as many from the kind of patient access, market access guests so far. So yeah, really excited. But we always kick off the Active Ingredients podcast in the same way. I like to ask, what do you think are the 3 key ingredients of leadership and why?
Yeah, thanks. So I think that's a great question. And I've given it some thought. And I think before you can answer this question, you have to define leadership, basically. And, for me, I define it as the process of inspiring others to put all the efforts towards achieving a goal, right? So if you start from that premise, and that's kind of an widely accepted definition of leadership, it starts with inspiring, right? And so for me, the first ingredient is building trust, because trust allows to build bridges, and bridges allow to create shared success. The second ingredient of that is curiosity, because it's an ingredient of trust, because it shows the other side that you have interest. And it also allows you to integrate multiple perspectives and to develop a more broadly relevant vision. And so for me, the second ingredient is curiosity. And for the last part of the definition, which is, to achieve a goal, you need to be really purposeful. So that's my third ingredient, is being purposeful. Because you need to have a clear goal, and you need to be able to communicate that goal. And if you're able to communicate it, it means that you've really understood it. It means that you've really thought through the problem that needs to be solved. And then you're able to inspire others and give clarity to the people you're trying to lead about what you're trying to achieve. And that in turn helps create trust. And then you're back full circle. So my 3 ingredients are build trust, curiosity always, and be purposeful.
Yeah, love it. And I also like that thought process there of the leadership flywheel. So it kind of comes back through, but absolutely superb. Building trust, always curious, and be purposeful. Thank you for those. And I'm keen to see how some of those will link their way through some of the discussion later on. But let's go back to the early years. Obviously, you and I just had a quick conversation about when you were at university. But were there any moments growing up in your early life or kind of at university where you thought, maybe these are stepping stones to the career that I have had?
Mm-hmm. I mean, to go to the very beginning, I grew up in the middle of a field in the Quebec countryside in Canada. And so I always had this affinity for nature, but I really had no clue what I wanted to do. And there was nobody in my surroundings that had been in science. And there was nobody in my surroundings that had a university degree. In fact, when I went to university and I got a scholarship, an entrance scholarship to go to university, it made the front page of our local newspaper. Uh, and yeah, so it was a big thing. But luckily, I was surrounded by, I had good teachers and mentors that kind of guided me through the academic path all the way to PhD, basically.
Wow. That's the first time that I've ever heard the story of being on the front page of the newspaper for going to university. How did that make you feel?
Yeah. I mean, it was for the scholarship, right? But it was also because it wasn't such a common thing for people to go to university from there. I mean, I felt like I was digging into the unknown, right? And I was basically following where things were guiding me. I mean, it basically started with somebody in my high school saying, "Well, with your grades, you're not going to, technical school or something. Like, you need to go to university." And then I liked biology, so I went there. But it was very, let's say, it was not very purposeful. I think this is something that I learned on the later in life.
Yeah, so you're there, you're studying. At which point did you go, okay, where's my career going to go now? How do I get started?
Yeah. So when we talk about stepping stones, after my PhD, this is where I really felt stuck for the first time. Because until then, I had been following, I had gotten scholarships and gotten admissions to programs and everything. But after the PhD, I sent, dozens of applications, and I was sure I would get a job, but nothing was coming up. And I remember thinking at a time, I need to pay rent, and I may have to, be a taxi driver or something. It was at that point, it was at that level, right? So basically, I had a friend who was in venture capital, and he just said very casually, he said, "Alex, there's this conference in biotech. You should go." And so I looked, and the price was way out of my budget. And basically, I borrowed money from my girlfriend at the time. I said, "Listen, can I borrow some money from you? I don't know if I'll be able to pay it back, but I'm going to go to this conference for the weekend in Quebec City, and it's some biotech stuff, and I'm going to bring my CV, and then we'll see where that leads." And it turns out it was a conference of all CEOs of biotech and pharma in Canada. And it was very expensive and very exclusive. And I was the only 27-year-old guy there who wasn't a CEO and who was looking for a job. And it turns out that they all thought it was very cool. And everybody was inviting me to their lunch table and everything. And then on the Monday, I had a job. I actually started my first day at the job, and it was a CRO in Canada. And pure luck, it was the first CRO in Canada that was integrating health economic questionnaires into the trials. And I had no clue what that was. I didn't know also how to do a clinical trial. And on my first day, somebody brought a big document on my desk, and it was good clinical practice. And they said, "Read this, and then we'll talk." And so over the years, I learned, how to develop clinical trial protocols, what it meant to, these health economic questionnaires, and what do you do with it? What do you do with the results, the models? It was a small company, so there was also a bit of business development. And then, I paid back my girlfriend on my first paycheck, and the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah, wow. It's when you look back, there's quite a big risk or quite a big ambitious step to take just to turn up at an event with a load of Canadian CEOs.
I think you need to be where others aren't. You need to if you're going to build these bridges, and sometimes you have to jump, and you have to trust in yourself, but you also have to be a bit bold, because otherwise you get lost in the mass of very good people, because there are very good people everywhere. And that's what was happening with my applications just out of my PhD. Basically, I had no experience. I had very specific knowledge. And so I needed to show that I could be, a broader thinker. And that was something that convinced the CEOs in the end.
Yeah, broader thinker, bit of a risk taker, curious, purposeful, and then also building trust in that room with a lot of very senior, well-experienced people. Fantastic. I mean, what a great start to this discussion. I love it. So tell me, before we dive into some of the topics that we want to discuss today, tell me, when did you first feel like a leader?
Yeah. It was actually not when I had my first team. It was before that. So I worked for a company called Merck KGaA, Merck Germany, and I was I was a global director in health economics and reimbursement. I didn't have a team. The company just had quite a big setback, as often happens in big pharma. And I was tasked to do a big enterprise-wide work stream. And the goal was to better integrate in clinical development market access considerations, right? So earlier market access considerations, so that you don't wait until regulatory approval to figure out that you need these are these comparators and all of that. And this is many years ago, so of course now this is way more integrated in the way we do things, but in the very beginning this was quite novel, actually, and there was a lot of resistance to it. And so I did a lot of interviews with a very broad set of stakeholders. But then it all came down to this workshop that I organized. And I managed to put in the room all the top leaders in clinical development in the company and commercial, and all the way to the CEO, and much more senior than me, all of them. I had zero authority over any of them. But I invited 3 payers. One from the US, one from Europe, and then another one that was going across. And I put in their hands target product profiles from products that we had in the company, so that everybody in the audience could recognize. And I stripped all the recognizable information. So then it was product X, product Y, product Z. And I told the payers to discuss it in front of the audience. And they basically trashed the target product profiles in front of the audience. And it was so impactful that after that, the company completely changed the way they, the criteria to pass from phase 1 to phase 2, phase 2 to phase 3. So those checkpoint criteria. And they totally, because then after that, I had the solution ready, right? I had the proposal for how to go forward. But they needed to hear from the external audience. And that's the first time that I realized that if I could find a way to impactfully communicate the vision, not only the solution, but also the problem statement, and that I had a solution that I could influence without authority. And for me, that's leadership. It's
quite a baptism of fire, to be able to be like, right, I'm going to have these internal discussions. I'm then going to start to think about who you're bringing in. They're then going to tear it all apart. At one point, were you like, oh no, what have I done?
I basically knew this would happen,
Great.
right? So it was calculated risk, because I said, in my interviews, I had seen that some people were really open to the change and some people were very resistant to it. And I realized that my voice wasn't going to be sufficient to change things, right? So I thought, if I don't have authority, Who does? And it's the customer in the end,
Yeah.
right? And so I decided to bring in the customer.
Yeah, love it. And then, yeah, as you say, sometimes it's that third party that has the more influential voice of change, but you are the catalyst to bring all of that together.
Yes.
So it's a great example as well, because I think that there are some leaders that maybe are stuck at the moment without feeling like they are being heard. And this is a really good example of how you can do that. So how did you go from expert to enterprise leader? I think that one's quite a good thing to discuss because, you just mentioned there that you've been leading functions previously as well with technical depth, a lot of precision. What was the hardest part of letting go of being that subject matter expert and then moving into bigger, broader leadership?
Yeah. So maybe for the audience to be clear, so I was for many years head of a function at Novartis, and I was head of global patient access, which included pricing, reimbursement, also real world evidence for a while. So I had a team of 10 people and then a supportive team of 20 people, but it was really an expert function. And then at one point during this tenure, I was part of a project where it was a due diligence. The company wanted to acquire another company. It was the first gene therapy, the first commercial gene therapy. The company was called Avexis, and it became Novartis Gene Therapy. So it was a almost 9 billion acquisition. This is public. And I was part of a very small due diligence team. And you probably heard with gene therapy, the biggest topic was the price. It became the most expensive treatment in the world at that time. And so there was a lot of discussion all the way to board level. And so that was a very fascinating, but that was still, as my expert function. To answer your question, what happened after that is that then there was a leadership transition in the neuroscience franchise. And I received a call one day. I was driving and I received a call. I stopped the car and it was the boss of my boss who said, we don't have a neuroscience franchise leader at the moment. We'd like it to be you ad interim. And I was speechless. I actually wasn't sure what to say, and I said, "Sure, I'll do it."
Yeah.
And it was a 4 billion business with 4,000 people, and it was during the time. So it was for a short time. It was for 4 months, but it was during the time of a global launch of a blockbuster drug that was critical to Novartis. And so it wasn't trivial, but what it meant is that it really propelled me to instantly be, to shed the expert, because that was not part of the job description. You were suddenly leader of leaders, total generalist. And one of the big roles was to bring together closer the global franchise with clinical development, the commercial clinical development and medical, while also doing, general things like HR topics, budget topics, closing the budget for the year. It was at the end of the year.
Yep.
There was a big conference. There were press releases. There were investor events. There was all of that. And yeah, so it was baptism by fire, as they say. But it was fantastic. It was the best time of my life.
Yeah, and I'm interested to know how you were able to then, within that short period of time, go from that kind of, as you say, expert with a smaller expert team to then leading across cultures and probably silos in a company of that size. When the pressure is on as well for a blockbuster drug, how did you step into that space? What was like the frameworks or the magic formula that you used to try and bring some of this together?
Yeah, there's no magic formula. And the other thing you need to add is that, you know, I was still seen as the head of global patient access. So I wasn't, and everybody knew I wasn't the new leader, right? I was the
Ad
ad
interim, yeah.
interim leader. And so the first thing I did is to make a clear promotion of somebody in my team to be the head of global patient access. So I stepped out of my role completely physically. So in a sense that I cut the cord with my previous role, which was a risk because I was only there ad interim. And so I had a succession plan in my team, and I officially made it so that this person became the de facto global patient access head. And then the best advice I got came, from somebody that I really didn't expect, but another leader of in the organization who told me, Alex, they took me aside at the Congress actually and said, Alex, from day one, you need to fill the shoes. From day one, you are the global franchise head. You're no longer the patient access head who is filling the shoes for a short time while we find a new leader. No, you are the global franchise head, and you need to be all in on day one. And I really, I slept on that, and I really took it to heart. And that was the single biggest thing, because what she said was, it's in your head. It all starts in your head, right? So if you're all in, then things will flow from that. And she was really right about that one. So yeah, I think this was the
Catalyst,
switch,
yeah.
the catalyst, exactly, that for me said, okay, and I mean, nobody was asking me about my expert on advice on patient access anymore. It wasn't that, right? So I was really, in the beginning, I was just really going from meeting to meeting, because when you're in this role, your schedule is organized by your PA from the morning to night, and and then of course you drive it. But I was going, in the beginning, I was going, listening, trying to go as broadly as possible, listening. I was traveling during that time, going to countries. I actually brought the entire leadership team to our research organization, which was in the US. So we were in Switzerland, and I brought the leadership team to the US. And it was the first time that our leadership team visited the labs. And that just opened up a whole relationship. And I knew I was successful because at the end of my term at Christmas, which was Christmas, so I started in September, and then at Christmas, I was handing over to the new leader. We had this Christmas event in the town hall, and all three functions, the research, the development, and the commercial, were on stage together for the first time. And so I knew that I had created this more better closeness between and collaboration that then helped future development efforts and launches in the franchise.
Yeah, I love it. So it's as you say, you were all in and then able to actually see it on stage as the handover happens. Like, that's a good legacy. That's something that I can now leave and be happy with the job that I've done there.
Yes.
Fantastic. One quick question on this. At the time, how was, I don't know, like patient access or pricing, how was it kind of viewed, that part of the world in the business? Because now it seems as though it's taken on a much more elevated, stance within an organization at boardroom level, especially.
I think pricing has always had a lot of attention from senior management, but the technical aspects of the pricing, of the health economics, reimbursement, access, was really very much a technical thing, and seen as very important, obviously, but handled by the functions. And now I think there's a much broader recognition that it all goes together. And it comes from, these very high political discussions happening in the US right now with most favored nation and all of those things. And at the time, it wasn't the case. But we were already starting to see a glimpse. I worked on a drug for migraine, and it's that's a very challenging area because it affects 10% of the population. It has a very high burden, but most people suffer in silence. It doesn't make the news as obesity does, for example, or other things. And so it's a very high budget impact for governments, but not a lot of attention to it. And so we were trying to develop new models to have better access to migraine drugs without having the big issues with the budgets of the governments. And so we tried all kinds of things. We tried self-pay opportunity, like obesity is doing now.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was completely novel, and so we had some limited successes with this. We were looking at private insurance. We developed a employer program because migraine has a very big burden on employer productivity. And so in that program, actually, we elevated all the way to our CEO, and our CEO presented it at WEF in Davos. So that was great. It was picked up by Harvard Business Review. And so I think, and then we started noticing also that the investors in the investor calls were asking access questions and pricing questions. And that basically elevated the discussion more and more. And now I think the executive committees are very much involved and the boards are very much involved.
Yeah, totally agree. And it seems as though also in order to get it to that point, there needs to be high performing teams in those expert parts of the organization. And you and I have spoken before about moving from early development into global launches and life cycle management. You've seen quite a lot of different teams, or you've had to build different teams in different pressure points in the business. What's your, I suppose, blueprint or success markers when it comes to building high performance teams over the years?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing is you need to establish what needs to be done and how many resources you're gonna need, right? So because you don't want an under-resourced team or to be high performance. The next thing is you go and find the best people for those roles that need to be done. And I actually like to take people that don't fit the mold perfectly, but have a right can-do attitude. And so, because that's how you move things forward, right? That's how you can disrupt and transform and have high performance. But then the real work starts. Because until then, that's the easy part, even though it's not. But the big work is to build the team, to build the high performance team out of these people. And it really starts by creating and aligning on the vision and the mission. Because if everybody aligns on the goal, then and how we're going to get there, then you have a better time. And then it's all the things about aligning on roles and responsibilities, processes, how we're going to interact between each other with other teams to avoid silos, how we're going to deal with issues. And then with me, it's very much an open door policy. And once we've aligned on all those things, then my job is to relentlessly remove obstacles for the team. So, and I'm saying that now. I mean, of course, I didn't do it all perfectly from the start. You really learn as you go. So this is really with hindsight, with experience, that your biggest role as a leader, once you've aligned on the vision and the mission, and you have the right people for the roles, is to remove the obstacles.
Remove the obstacles, but also you mentioned there that you had an open door policy. I mean, it was even more open than that, wasn't it? With almost like this new leader integration type understanding where, you're really putting yourself out there. Do you want to explain a little bit more about maybe the benefits of a new leader integration workshop and how it actually helped you with some of your team as you were building that high performing organization?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you build a team, the work, within the team is just as important as the work between the team and the leader as well, right? So, when I became a new leader, and I mean the leader of the function, there was a process at the time where after 3 to 6 months, you get into a room with your team and a moderator. In that case was from human resources. And the leader explains his or her vision, and tells a little bit more about themselves, and then leaves the room. And then the team gives feedback on the leader on those first 3 to 6 months. And the moderator collates that feedback anonymously on a board. And that lasts, a long time, like close to 2 hours. and then the leader comes back in and receives the feedback from the moderator. And the team is free to chip in or not as they wish. And then the leader reacts in real time to the feedback. And so, of course, it can be a very emotional time. It can be a very challenging time, but it's also an opportunity to show that you really have the team's success at heart, and that you really want to listen, and you really have this improvement mindset. And then what's important is what happens after that, obviously, is how you step up and address the feedback, and how you change things for the better, act on both the positive and the negative feedback. But it also builds tremendous trust. It accelerates trust building, and I think for me this was the reason why it's very favorable.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting because no matter what what environment you're in, there'll always be some people that really like you and your style. There'll always be some people that don't, and then there'll be some people that can be influenced in the middle.
Yes.
So, was it a good opportunity for you to almost have a look in the mirror and say, okay, all right, I understand. I'll take this on board and I'll try and, develop where you need me to?
Absolutely, because I think, if you're going to have a broad impact, you need to have a vision and a style that appeals to the broadest group of people possible, right? And your team is a bit of a microcosm. Honestly, if your vision your team doesn't react positively to your vision and to your style, you can assume that the broader population also has this mix of people, right? So it's very important to understand how you come across in that environment, because and to be self-aware. So that's why I think self-awareness for a leader is very important. And self-awareness sometimes is difficult to have on your own without the feedback and without having this mirror once in a while, right? And then also, of course, sometimes this exercise and other similar exercises, what it surfaces is tensions within the team also. And it's better to address that very early than to let it fester and to have to deal with bigger problems later. So I think, any type like this of feedback session can be very beneficial, but it has to, you have to show that you listened, because if you walk out of there and keep being the same and not doing anything different, then you've actually reduce trust.
Yeah, and it's that, as you say, like that is the absolute for you building high performance teams. It seems like trust is a thing that binds it for you, even with diverse backgrounds or people with that can-do attitude. It's easy to lose the trust. So yeah, I mean, it sounds like a very, I don't want to say brutal, but a good way of really understanding what your team is thinking and being able to then work on it together to try and get through to a more positive outcome.
Yeah. And I mean, what I did after that was, after we went through this, and a little bit time passes and I've had time to implement some changes, then we went for a high performance team workshop where the objective is very different. The objective there is to cement the team together in a high performance team. So it's a very positive, forward looking, improving the whole team together, how we work together. And that also showed that I wanted to bring the team forward.
Yeah. And now we're going to fast forward, okay, to look at your kind of career development post corporate life within some of the biggest companies. So you've successfully been able to almost reinvent your career, where there's a lot of listeners that are probably thinking of the same thing at the moment, but you've moved from global roles at your Novartis's, your Merck's, and then you've been able to purposefully change into that kind of biotech building space. So do you want to give us just a little bit of insight as to how that reinvention happened? And obviously, I'll ask you some questions and we can explore it in a bit more detail.
Yeah. I mean, the biotech world always attracted me for some, so I'll preface it with this. I was always attracted to it.
Yeah.
I was in big pharma, but I was always attracted to the entrepreneurship because it was also my first role, right? In a small company, a CRO, but still a small company where we were moving fast and doing a lot of different things. So, and then, like many people who are listening, unfortunately, there was a restructuring in my company when I turned 50, and I was offered other roles, to be honest, within the company, but lower roles with less responsibility, and I decided at that time, I really thought. And I said, I can stay, I can try to maintain stability and then rebuild from there. Or I can read the writing on the wall, as they say, and take the plunge. And, for me, what was always in the back of my mind is my dad lost his job at 50 and he was never able to find another one. I witnessed him, sending hundreds of CVs and being told that he was too old and too expensive and that he couldn't, find a new job. And he found other small jobs, but in the end, that didn't work. And so I was really determined and had a very strong, let's say, inner incentive to not let that happen. And so and I did at the time also apply for some other big pharma jobs, but I realized myself that I wasn't into it that much because I wanted to really grow and do something different. And so I started an advisory company, consulting company, doing what I know, so patient access and everything. But I knew that my goal in doing that wasn't to make tons of money with this. It was to meet people because my network was very much in those big companies, but I wanted to meet a broader group of people. And so I went to conferences again. This time I didn't have to borrow the money. I could find it in my own savings. But that's what I did. And then I met a lot of CEOs of small companies, medium companies, and I met the CEO of a Korean company who was incidentally looking for somebody in Europe to open an office here and do more business development for them and everything. And I said, after hearing about their science and their company, I really liked what I saw, and I said, I would like to work for you. And so this we started. I mean, we can discuss it more later, but basically this is how we started a long journey together. And this is a team that I'm still working with today.
Yeah. So how did you know when it was the right time to bet on yourself? Obviously, you've got this opportunity to potentially still stay in large pharma, but it takes some courage to go, no, I actually want to do something else. So yeah, how did you know it was the right time?
Yeah. I mean, in terms of betting on myself to be true, it's all the time, right? It's since I'm very young, it's always been, you have to be self-sufficient. And this was ingrained to me with my parents, and, having to pay for my own studies and everything. I've always been betting on myself. But here, this is more about stepping away from, you know, certainty or what you know already, and going into the unknown, and taking big risks. And I think, very practically, to be honest, you have to be financially stable at least for a certain amount of time, right? So you need to say, and then you need to give yourself a timeline, and you need to say, I'm going to try it out, and if it doesn't work within whatever it is, a year, 2 years, then I need to go back to what I know, and at least I'll have tried it. And I thought, look, I'm 50. If I retire at 65, I mean, 15 years is a long time to, so I want to be spending that time doing something I love. So I still have a long runway. So now's the right time.
Yeah, and also if you're purposeful in your network building, almost treating
Yes.
it like it's the job until you get what you're going to do next.
That's the key. Yes, exactly. You have to be very purposeful. You have to know what you want, and what you're looking for. And then, because, in those conferences, the great thing is you can set up meetings with people. And I was really selecting who I was setting meetings up with. And, with investors, with CEOs of small companies. And I knew what I was offering and what I was asking for. And I think it's important to do that homework before you go in.
Yeah. And then it's down to your curiosity, asking good questions, but, again, from a purposeful standpoint, and then it's building trust.
Yes.
Okay, so if we now look at how you've gone from meeting lots of CEOs at different events to then being in the position where you are now, where, as a very senior leader within a different cultural organization, going from, a Novartis type business to then working in a Korean business can be very different. How did you do that? Through trust, through patience? What's the expertise that you can share here?
Yeah, I think you need to think of, if you're going to work with Asian cultures especially, you need to think of patience as a strategic asset. So you need to really think, you really need to be patient, and you need to invest in the relationship. And you need to build trust as the first objective. And so the way I did that was basically by offering expertise and time, and also going there to meet in person, very important. But then also to get on the same communication style and frequency as them, to match their communication style and frequency. So, in China, they use WeChat as an app. Here, maybe we use WhatsApp. In Korea, they use one called KakaoTalk. And so that was the first thing I did, was to get on KakaoTalk and to be part with the team, and to have these frequent interactions. and also to share about my personal life, share about my my experience, and be very generous in giving expertise and time, and showing that you're invested in the success of the people that you're working with. And that does loads to work to build trust. I think the mistake that people do make when they try to work with other cultures is right away they talk about the differences and how can we address these differences. And sometimes it's even very subtle, like, at a restaurant, oh, we don't eat like this, we eat this, we eat that, and try to talk about this. But actually, I had a discussion with a good Chinese friend of mine who I worked with at Novartis. And we said, how did we make it work between the two of us? And actually, we focused on what was similar first. And then we build on that foundation of what unites us. And then it's so much easier to address any differences after that.
Yeah. Do you think that patience maybe is underrated in some of the Western leadership models and ways of working?
Yeah, because I think we think of it as being passive, waiting, when actually you should reframe it. A better way to frame it is to say you're investing in activities that will, lead to a better long-term outcome. And so and that usually entails building the relationships. And that, at least in Asian cultures, that's very critical. I've read that in Japan, for example, if you haven't been around for 3 to 5 years, it's going to be very difficult to sign a long-term business deal because they have no confidence that you're in it for the long term, right? And that they can count on you if something goes wrong. So, and that, I think, translates in different ways across the different Asian cultures. But I think we also should, learn from that here. I think there's a lot to apply in this, and not just in working with Asian cultures, but using patience as a strategic asset and seeing it more as a investment into the long-term goal, having the long-term goal in view versus that only the short-term goal all the time.
Yeah, I love it. I love the way that you've articulated that. What has Korea in particular taught you that you couldn't have learned anywhere else? Because it's a really interesting market at the moment within the life sciences sector.
Yeah, so Korea is fascinating. I mean, I'm still learning so much about it every day, and it's sometimes difficult to separate what I'm learning as being in a small biotech and versus what I'm learning about purely Korea, right? So, maybe one thing I'll say is Korea, like a lot of the Asian cultures, has a lot of unsaid. It's a lot of implicit communication, and they have a term called nunchi, which basically refers to reading the room, being able to read the room, and reading the unspoken language. And so I have the chance that my CEO is very open and very fun to work with, and he teaches me a lot about this when we're in meetings with investors or with business partners. And so, first of all, I have a team that's very tolerant and very happy to work with me, and I'm very happy to work with them. And so it makes it so much easier. But when we work with external stakeholders, I learn a lot about observing them in that environment. And so I think even if I was going to work purely in a Western culture next, I would still apply that. Yes.
Yeah, it's great. It's just those little nuances, and I think that there is nothing better than patience and calmness. Sometimes in a room where there's egos and noise, it's sometimes that kind of quiet leadership is a great skill to be developing, even later on in your career.
And it inspires trust, right? So,
which is a complete theme throughout your entire discussion, and I've absolutely loved learning more about how you've been able to almost not untangle, but purposefully move away from large pharma into some really different environments and continue to be successful. So let's talk about the future of life sciences now that you are a little bit more free and able to get your head up and have a few more eyes on what's going on. What excites you most about where life sciences is heading at the moment?
I mean, it's hard not to mention AI. I think there's going to be, it's this new interface of new technology and people innovation, and how and where and when is that going to lead us to the next inflection point? And there's, of course, a lot of very exciting promise. Um, I think we're going to have to separate the hype from the reality, and I think still the big players are probably best positioned at this stage to see big breakthroughs. Even though the small players have a lot of interesting technology, I think to really make it work, you need a lot of data. You need a lot of yeah. But it's exciting for sure to see where that's going to lead us.
Yeah. And what about from a kind of pricing pressure, access challenges? Do you think that that is undertaking a bit of evolution at the moment as well?
I mean, I think we're seeing a forced rethinking of pricing across the world, right? So when we were, let's say, in my time, already it feels like ages ago, but we had a clear pricing process, and we knew what the rules were. Now, of course, the rules are changing. And so this process is going to have to change. In terms of the requirements from the payers, I mean, this is quite stable, to be honest. They have a fixed budget, and or increasing or decreasing over the years, and they need to manage within that budget. And some drugs go off patent, and then you have generics, so decreasing the budget, and you have new drugs increasing the budget, and they need to balance that. So I think we're going to continue to have to demonstrate value, and we're going to continue to have to justify the price for the value, right? So the cost effectiveness, whether you call it that or not in the different markets, I think that's still going to be important. What's changing is the volume of what's coming through, right? And with new technology, there's going to be so many new developments. How is that going to impact pricing discussions, right? And what will be the bar for innovation to really be able to have pricing power? And that's what I think a lot about.
Okay.
Because in small biotech, you have to start developing things, and you have to kill very early things that are not going to be differentiated enough, and that can be hard for a small company with limited resources. So yeah, it's always top of mind.
Yes, yeah. And then, as you said earlier, when we were speaking about the cell and gene therapy space, you've got cost of goods issues there and all sorts.
Correct.
So, and what about the future of leadership? What qualities do you think will define the future of the next generation of leaders in life sciences?
Yeah. I think, again, here you can't not talk about AI, because AI is going to be a big part of our workplaces in the very near future. And so what's going to separate the good leaders is going to be our human qualities in the end, right? So we're back to empathy, being able to build trust, and being able to to act on intuition, and then to continue to be curious. So the ones who are continuing to learn and to engage with the technology. I mean, in my own time, I've built 3 apps already. one of them I'm looking to see how I can bring it to the App Store and things like that but I'm not a programmer, right? So I've just tried to engage with the technology to try to understand what we're up with, what we're going to have to deal with, and how we're going to work with that. We're going to hear, instead of human resources, it's going to be resources, right? So you're going to have human employees, you're going to have AI employees, and so how do you manage that as a leader? I think it's really anchoring on our human qualities.
Yeah, you and I are kindred spirits there. I think that definitely the use of and the adoption of AI is going to really help determine future leader success, but only if the human aspect is as important as the AI aspect, if not more. So yeah, absolutely. I've loved today's conversation, Alex. Been full of some fantastic information. Thank you very much for sharing, for being so open. Kudos for the career as well, coming from that scholarship in Quebec all the way through to now, a very varied career. And yeah, kudos. Thank you very much for your time. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having me. Great.
Cheers, Alex.